Да, подожди, раз, два, третий этаж, ближе к орлу к этому, да? Да, 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 да. Да не, что-то где-то он пытался в магазин заехать, пытался прорваться с левого берега, но пока не знаю, надо его набрать. Его не хватит сюда его опустить, вот привязать где-то? Хватит? Я его тут к парапету привяжу. И там... Опа. О. Скотч, как моя жизнь. Извините, сейчас я отпустил. Есть. А, хорошо. Вот это, с которой мы разговаривали? Нет? Ага. Ну, пусть приходит. Ну, хорошо, сейчас идут. Что-что? Хорошо. Да сильно... Оно потом вырвется. Оторвать его несложно.
up on the borders of Ukraine, on the eastern border and northern border, was just a show of force, which was not aimed at any real military operation against Ukraine. As for the opinion polls, I do not have access to the recent opinion polls, but from my milieu, so to speak, from my information bubble, I would say there are two currents of ideas. On the one hand, people generally do not get the point of the Russian military operation in Ukraine and do not generally support the operation in Ukraine. However, at the same time, Russians being patriotic, they do not want the Russian army to fail, because it would be unpatriotic to want the Russian army to fail. That's it. So they are stunned and perplexed, should I say.
What do you think President Putin's motivations here? A hark back to the Soviet Union, really wanting to take Ukraine back into Russian control into the old days? And if so, will he stop there?
I'm not sure that in the West people understand that there are differences between the Soviet idea and the Russian idea, or Russian ethnic national idea. So taking back Ukraine under Russian control is about this Russian national or nationalist narrative, not the Soviet one. And nobody in the Kremlin or in Russia wants to, let's say, recapture Estonia or Armenia for that matter. So when we read the texts of Vladimir Putin about the history of Russia and Ukraine, when we hear his statements about Russia and Ukraine and our common ancestry, I mean, prior to the recent events, we thought that it was just his hobby, you know, he just liked history. So nobody took it really seriously. But now we see that he meant it. He meant that he really believed that the Russians and the Ukrainians are the one nation. And as Russia began its military operation in Ukraine, I think he believed that Ukrainians would would be happy to get liberated from the Kiev regime. But from what we see, it's not what's happening. And moreover, one more thing is that actually when Russian neighbors hear from Moscow that Russia is afraid and that Russia wants security guarantees, they do not buy it. They think that Moscow wants something else, and it's just a smoke screen. But generally speaking, I think that the Kremlin believes, and historically has believed, that indeed Russia is vulnerable for outside aggression. So Russia needs this security perimeter, so to speak. Once again, for small countries like Estonia or Latvia, it's impossible to understand how this great Russian bear can be afraid of anyone or anything. But deep inside, I mean, we feel fragile.
How do you think this is going to play out over the next days and weeks? Clearly, Russia is trying to move in a bit more, but apart from, it hasn't really got any allies, has he? So the world is pretty much against him. Interesting to note that China did abstain at this Security Council gathering last night, but he's not really going to get anywhere, is he?
There are two questions. First is a military one, and the second is a political one, or political and economic. Militarily speaking, well, from what I hear from military experts here in Russia, they say that the military operation can be finished, I don't know, in a week or two. But the political question is much more difficult to answer, because the rationale, the official rationale by the Kremlin is that it wants to denazify Ukraine and sort of to make it more pro-Russian. I'm not sure, I don't understand how technically it's possible, since Ukraine is a democracy, maybe not flawless democracy, but democracy anyway. So I'm not sure how could Russia install a pro-Russian president, and how could Russia make sure that any next president of Ukraine would remain like pro-Russian. I mean, technically, I don't understand how it's possible. Once again, Crimea is one thing. Like there are 2 million people in Crimea. It was relatively easy to capture Crimea without firing a shot, because unlike in Ukraine proper, the majority of the Crimeans, they were Russian, either ethnically or pro-Russian, like in their political orientation. But Ukraine proper
we will thank you for your time today, and we'll come back to you and get your thoughts again. Very interesting. Thank you, Stanislav Bishok in Moscow there. We interrupted our guest there because we have had some words in from Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president. Let's hear what he's had to say in the past few minutes.
We are successfully holding back the enemy's attacks. We know that we're defending our land, the future of our children. Kiev and the key areas are controlled by our army. The occupiers wanted to set up their puppets in our capital. They didn't succeed. On our streets in Kiev, in Vasilkov, Vyshgorod, and in the field there was a proper fighting going on. The enemy was using all its weapons, artillery, paratroopers, all weapons. They're hitting residential areas. They're trying to destroy energy infrastructure. They are hitting the residential buildings, and everyone should help us to stop this occupation. Ukrainian people deserve to become member of the EU, and this would be a signal of your support to Ukraine. And this discussion should be closed. We discussed this today with European leaders. All the equipment and defense military help is coming to Ukraine, and work is going on disconnecting Russia from SWIFT. I hope Hungary will have force to support this decision. In every our place, city, town, Uman, Kherson, Odessa, Donbass, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, everywhere where enemy is killing our people, our armed forces are doing everything they can to destroy the enemy. And those cities and towns that are being attacked from the air are holding up. Well done. If you can destroy the occupiers, please do it. Everyone who can come back to Ukraine, please come back to defend Ukraine. And after that, we will have a lot of work to do to rebuild our Ukraine. Everyone who can defend Ukraine abroad, please do it. Do it directly in a united way. Every friend of Ukraine who wants to join Ukraine in defending the country, please come over. We will give you weapons. It will be announced soon, very shortly, how this can be done. Everyone who is defending Ukraine is a hero. Skakun Vitaly Volodymyrovich, the sapper who blew up the bridge and lost his wife, is now announced a hero of Ukraine. And now I want everyone in Russia to hear me, everybody. Hundreds of captured soldiers who are here in Ukraine don't know why they were sent here, to kill people or to be killed. The sooner you tell your government that the war has to be stopped, more people from your country will stay alive. Your nationals are voicing their opposition to this war. We know that many people in Russia are shocked now by the brutality of the Russian government, and this is the right reaction. I'm grateful to this reaction. Thank you to Leonid Parfenov, Muratov, Valery Miladze, and thousands of decent Russian people whose conscience is voicing their opinion. Please stop those who are lying, who are trying to lie to you, who is lying to us. We need to stop this war. We can live in peace together globally as humans. Our military, our National Guard, National Police, Territory Defense, Special Service, Nationals of Ukraine, please carry on. We will win. Glory to Ukraine.
We will win, says President Zelensky of Ukraine there. So he spoke just a few minutes ago, says that the Ukrainians are successfully holding back attacks on key cities, including Kiev, the capital, and other areas. He said Ukraine had earned the right to become a member of the EU and put out an appeal, didn't he, to people who had left Ukraine to come back and fight for their country. We'll get more reaction to that during the course of the morning. Do stay with us for now. I want to bring you some pictures from the border here. This is the Ukraine-Romanian border. People are trying to leave Ukraine in their droves. In fact, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees said more than 116,000 people have actually fled Ukraine since the Russian invasion started on Thursday. Most are going to Poland, others to Hungary, Moldova, Slovakia, and as you can see there, trying to get into Romania. The UNHCR says the numbers are rising and rising rapidly. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Hello, welcome back. Another development on the Ukraine crisis. A tweet just in from Ukraine's foreign minister, who says he has had a call with his French counterpart, Monsieur Le Drian. He said that France supports banning Russia from SWIFT. This is this global interbank messaging system that helps facilitate payments around the world. The foreign minister says, I urged him to immediately introduce the third package of EU sanctions to stop a Russian invasion. France is ready to supply weapons and military equipment to help Ukraine defend itself. Many countries also coming to the aid of Ukraine by sending equipment in. So that's to do with the SWIFT mechanism here to help facilitate payments. No decision has been taken, but it would seem that France does support that. Well, of course, Russian forces continuing their move now towards the centre of the Ukrainian capital. Here are the key developments so far today. Russian troops closing in on Kiev with explosions and gunfire heard in the capital overnight. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has appealed for a ceasefire and warned that multiple cities are under attack. But of course, as we just heard, the Ukrainians, he says, are successfully holding back these attacks at the moment. A total of 27 nations, including the UK and the United States, have agreed to give more weapons, medical supplies and other military aid to Ukraine, Sky News understands. A UN Security Council resolution last night telling Moscow to stop attacking Ukraine and withdraw all troops immediately was vetoed by Russia. The vote was 11-1. China, India and the United Arab Emirates abstained. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, has this report.
Kiev's Maidan Square. Crucible of Ukraine's people power revolution. Menaced through the night by the sound of constant gunfire and explosions. The fighting is coming closer and closer to the centre. This is thought to have been filmed on one of the main routes into the city, burning vehicles on Peremyhy or Victory Avenue. Across the capital, the sound of explosions through the night, as Ukraine's president issued this call to arms to his people.
We will not lay down the weapons. We will defend our state, because our weapon is our truth. And the truth is that this is our land, our country, our children. And we will defend all of that.
More apocalyptic scenes sear the night sky in the south of the country. The city of Mykolaiv lit up by a huge fireball. Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues relentlessly, columns of armour streaming through its highways. And with them reports of atrocities. This is reportedly an attack on a hospital in Melitopol. In Kiev, Ukrainian forces are deploying as the Russians encircle their city. Fighting in these residential areas could lead to huge civilian loss of life. The mass exodus from the capital continues, people rushing to flee their beleaguered city, seeking safety further west. Scenes Europe hasn't witnessed for 80 years played out as Russia's unprovoked attack on its neighbour continues without restraint. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Moscow.
Now, some more breaking news. We just had a tweet in from the Ministry of Defence regarding the latest situation in Ukraine. Let us... It's down to an intelligence update, we understand. Russian forces, it says, have continued their advance on Kiev with the bulk of their forces now at 30 kilometres from the city. So that's over 20 miles away. Russia, the MOD says, has yet to gain control of the airspace over Ukraine, greatly reducing the effectiveness of the Russian Air Force. Ukrainian armed forces continue to put up staunch resistance across the country, it is said, and Russian casualties are likely to be heavy and greater than anticipated or acknowledged by the Kremlin. So that's the updates on the situation in Ukraine, just in a tweet issued by the Ministry of Defense. Of course, President Zelensky has said that Ukrainian forces are successfully holding back attacks on Kiev and many key areas of the city. And in the past few minutes, you'll have heard him saying that his country has earned the right to become a member of the European Union, and appealed for people who have left Ukraine to come back and fight for their country. The UNHCR saying it estimates 116,000 have already fled to neighbouring countries, the bulk of those set to go west to Poland. All right, let's tell you about the Ukrainian tennis player Sergei Stakhovsky, who has expressed his anger at the lack of help from the rest of the world with the Russian invasion of Ukraine as civilians offer their services to the forces. He said he, like many other ordinary people, have signed up to defend his country. He's been speaking to our sports presenter, Jackie Beltran.
It looks like they abandoned the plan of basically capturing the big cities, and they're just trying to push into Kiev and capture the president and most likely assassinate him and to install a new government. And they do believe that, assassinating Zelensky will actually change the perspective or the narrative of the resistance in Ukraine. I don't know. I'm just shocked that the world is standing by. They cannot even cut them out of the SWIFT code, which is not even going to damage that hard Russia. And it's not that hard to do. And Europe cannot even do that. They cannot even close our airspace, so the airships would not attack us from the air, so that our troops would have a fighting chance to actually defend ourselves. There's not much need to be done. The biggest problem is that once they capture Ukraine, who's going to be next?
You still have family there. Your mum's there. I think your brother's there. Have you spoken to them? What are they doing? Are they hiding? I mean, what are they doing to stay safe?
My father is a professor of urology. So he does what he does. He goes to work. Same as my brother.
So they're trying to carry on. It's okay. Take your time. If you could get back and you had to, would you fight?
So that's the only reason I'm coming back.
You would fight, even though you're a tennis player?
The army opened up the reserves, and everybody who's willing to fight to come in and collect the weapons and to be part of the territorial resistance. There's plenty of people in them. I've actually signed up for reserves last week. I left Kiev on Saturday. I just didn't have enough documents to sign the contract.
There's going to be a lot of support for Ukraine. In football, this weekend, it's been approved that if players, managers want to show the Ukrainian flag, they can. Does that make any difference?
It makes a world of difference to our armed forces, I would say. Seeing that they're not left alone, at least, in a media environment. But let's be realistic here. It's been 8 years of the war since Russia. Whether it was Russia proxies or Russia itself, it doesn't matter. Where was all of this for the 8 years? None of us believed that it's going to happen. And yet it happened, and none of them, the European leaders or the world, is ready to act, ready to help, ready to put the fight in Ukraine for maybe a better Europe in the future. We want to be a normal, civilized country with democracy where you can actually elect your president. Mm-hmm. And as far as I can go, I can say that today, the president we have is most likely the only president which we ever had in terms of standing for his country and believing in what he does and risking his own life. The only one. All of them before were just political jokes. They were political jokes. He may be a comedian in life, but he's become a president for people.
Now, it's understood Russian troops are approaching Kiev from two sides in an attempt to surround the capital. But our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, has reported that many of the Ukrainian soldiers are young and inexperienced. He found 21-year-old Sergei Petroshenko, who had only ever fired a weapon 16 times, guarding a footbridge alone.
From my village, they're gonna go here on Kiev to capture it. Yeah, it's really scary and terrifying. I am called to my parents. They really scared. There's Russians in our village, enemies. There's tanks, heavy vehicle. I hope that they will be fine.
Some breaking news to bring you, being reported through the Reuters news agency. It says a Russian cargo ship has been seized in the English Channel. Now, I should say that this is according to a Russian state news agency, RIA, which is citing reports from the Russian embassy in France. So we don't know exactly what has happened or where that has happened, but these reports in that a Russian cargo ship has been seized in the English Channel today, according to this Russian news agency. So we'll keep tabs on that and try and bring you a little more on it. We'll bring you the latest developments from Ukraine in a couple of minutes, but first, let's have a look at the weather here.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, the weekend looks largely fine and settled, although the north and west will be windy with rain at times. It's going to turn wet on Monday. Today will be quite mild for most, but there will be a cold wind in the west and gales near northwestern coasts. England and Wales will be dry with almost unbroken sunshine this afternoon. Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland, meanwhile, will be rather cloudy, although there will be some sunny breaks, best of these over northeast Scotland. There'll be a little rain or drizzle in places, mainly over the coasts and hills there. Ireland, Northern Ireland and Western Scotland will see outbreaks of increasingly light and patchy rain moving in overnight, but Ireland will mostly dry up later. The stiff wind in the west will gradually ease. England and Wales will be mostly dry and clear with an extensive frost developing. Most places fine on Sunday, patchy rain over Western Scotland and near Irish Sea coasts.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up on Sky News in a few minutes, the latest on the situation in Ukraine. The UNHCR says 116,000 people have crossed various borders. Hello, you're watching Sky News. I'm Nick Qureshi. Here are the headlines at 11. The battle for Kiev. Street fighting, gunfire and shelling are heard in the Ukrainian capital as Russian forces attempt to move in. A missile hits an apartment building close to one of the city's airports as the country's president remains defiant.
The occupiers wanted to set up their puppets in our capital. They didn't succeed.
27 nations, including the UK and the US, agreed to supply more weapons, as the Ukrainian health minister says nearly 200 people have been killed, including children. Refugees continue to flee. The UN says around 120,000 people have left Ukraine since the invasion began. Anti-war protests are held across Russia. And refusing to play, the latest blow to Russia's sports teams as Poland say they will not take part in a World Cup qualifier. Hello, good morning. Ukrainian troops are in a battle to hold Kiev as Russian forces attempt to move in on the capital. Explosions have been heard in the city itself, and heavy fighting has been reported in the surrounding areas. There are also reports this morning of fighting on the streets against the Russian army, with witnesses reporting hearing gunfire close to the government quarters in central Kiev. A residential building near one of the city's airports has been hit, but Ukrainian officials say there were no casualties from the missile strike. The Ukrainian president, meanwhile, says his country has stood up and successfully fought Russian attacks and that the Ukrainian army still controls key cities. Ukraine's health minister says 198 people, including 3 children, have been killed across the country. Well, here are the other latest developments as Russia's invasion is now into a 3rd day. Russian troops are closing in on Kiev, with explosions and gunfire heard in the capital overnight. The Ministry of Defence here says the bulk of Russian forces are now 30 kilometres, that's less than 19 miles, from the centre of Kiev. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has appealed for a ceasefire and warned that several cities are under attack. A total of 27 nations, including the UK and the United States, have agreed to give more weapons, medical supplies and other military aid to Ukraine, Sky News understands. And a UN Security Council resolution telling Moscow to stop attacking Ukraine and to withdraw all troops last night was vetoed by Russia. The vote was 11-1, with China, India and the United Arab Emirates abstaining. Emma Birchley has the latest for us now.
Through the clear blue skies of Kiev, a missile attack on the homes of Ukrainian families. The rocket ripped the side out of the apartment block in the southwestern outskirts of the city.
There are heavily damaged flats. We continue looking for injured people. So far, we've found at least 6 injured. There was fire on 2 floors, about 20 metres squared. 80 people have been evacuated.
This is thought to have been filmed on one of the main routes into the city. Burning vehicles on Peremyhy or Victory Avenue. Across the capital, the sound of explosions through the night as Ukraine's president issued this call to arms to his people.
We will not lay down the weapons. We will defend our state, because our weapon is our truth. And the truth is that this is our land, our country, our children. And we will defend all of that.
More apocalyptic scenes sear the night sky in the south of the country. The city of Mykolaiv lit up by a huge fireball. Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues relentlessly. Columns of armour streaming through its highways. And with them, reports of atrocities. This is reportedly an attack on a hospital in Melitopol. In Kiev, Ukrainian forces are deploying as the Russians encircle their city. Fighting in these residential areas could lead to huge civilian loss of life. The mass exodus from the capital continues, people rushing to flee their beleaguered city, seeking safety further west. Scenes Europe hasn't witnessed for 80 years played out as Russia's unprovoked attack on its neighbour continues without restraint. Emma Birchley, Sky News.
Now, in the last hour, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has insisted that domestic forces are still in control of Kiev, despite reports of fighting overnight. In a video address, Mr. Zelensky added that Ukraine is still in control of key points around the city.
We are successfully holding back the enemy's attacks. We know that we're defending our land, the future of our children. Kiev and the key areas are controlled by our army. The occupiers wanted to set up their puppets in our capital. They didn't succeed. On our streets in Kiev, in Vasilkov, Vyshgorod, and in the field there was a proper fighting going on. The enemy was using all its weapons, artillery, paratroopers, all weapons. They're hitting residential areas. They're trying to destroy energy infrastructure. They are hitting the residential buildings, and everyone should help us to stop this occupation. Ukrainian people deserve to become member of the EU, and this would be a signal of your support to Ukraine. And this discussion should be closed. We discussed this today with European leaders. All the equipment and defense military help is coming to Ukraine, and work is going on disconnecting Russia from SWIFT. I hope Hungary will have force to support this decision. In every our place, city, town, Uman, Kherson, Odessa, Donbass, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, everywhere where enemy is killing our people, our armed forces are doing everything they can to destroy the enemy. And those cities and towns that are being attacked from the air are holding up. Well done. If you can destroy the occupiers, please do it. Everyone who can come back to Ukraine, please come back to defend Ukraine. And after that, we will have a lot of work to do to rebuild our Ukraine. Everyone who can defend Ukraine abroad, please do it. Do it directly in a united way. Every friend of Ukraine who wants to join Ukraine in defending the country, please come over. We will give you weapons. It will be announced soon, very shortly, how this can be done. Everyone who is defending Ukraine is a hero. Skakun Vitaly Volodymyrovich, the sapper who blew up the bridge and lost, he's now announced a hero of Ukraine. And now I want everyone in Russia to hear me, everybody. Hundreds of captured soldiers who are here in Ukraine don't know why they were sent here, to kill people or to be killed. The sooner you tell your government that the war has to be stopped, more people from your country will stay alive. Your nationals are voicing their opposition to this war. We know that many people in Russia are shocked now by the brutality of the Russian government, and this is the right reaction. I'm grateful to this reaction. Thank you to Leonid Parfenov, Muratov, Valery Miladze, and thousands of decent Russian people whose conscience is voicing their opinion. Please stop those who are lying, who are trying to lie to you, who is lying to us. We need to stop this war. We can live in peace together globally as humans. Our military, our National Guard, National Police, territory defense, special service, nationals of Ukraine, please carry on. We will win.
Now, Sky's security and defence editor Deborah Haynes has the latest for us from the Ukrainian capital.
I'm in central Kiev. It's eerily quiet. The streets are pretty much empty. There are a few civilians. We've seen people carrying weapons. We've seen military personnel. I saw a couple of individuals loading ammunition into the back of their car. We've seen people on the top of the roof of the building over there behind me. It's the Foreign Ministry building. Presumably they're watching out in case anyone tries to attack the building. Today we've heard explosions, distant explosions, also the odd sound of gunfire. People in the city have been told to stay at home. Many have already left. The road down there is usually a main busy road filled with cafes, shops. It goes down to Independence Square. And over here again, just have a look at that empty street. This is a city in fear as they wait to see what happens next, knowing that the plan for the Russian troops is to encircle the capital and try to topple the president and his government.
You can see there our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, who is in Moscow. Good to see you, Dominic. So really, fierce resistance, more than anticipated from the Ukrainians as Russians move, or certainly try to encircle Kiev.
Yeah, and events moving against them in the channel as well. This strange report that the RIA, Russian news agency, claims that the Russian embassy in Paris is complaining to the French government about the seizure of a Russian cargo ship called the Baltic Leader. It has been taken to a French port, says RIA, after a request by the French government because it's suspected of belonging to a company targeted by EU sanctions against Moscow. It's thought to be carrying cars or vehicles, and it's been taken to Boulogne. That is the least of Russia's problems, though, as you say. The increasing reports and signs and evidence that the Russian advance is becoming bogged down and not going at the kind of blitzkrieg speed that the Russian planners would have hoped for. The British Minister of Defence saying that they are meeting staunch resistance, saying that the bulk of Russian forces involved in the invasion are now less than 20 miles from Kiev. Has to be stressed that I think only a third or a half of the more than 150,000 troops that have been massing on the borders for weeks around Ukraine have And we've been told by a number of analysts that without that kind of very quick success and a decisive victory, the Russian government will be in deepening trouble with the people here as the body bags start coming home and the reports, and I think the news starts dawning on them that this could become more of a protracted offensive.
All right, Dominic, many thanks indeed for now. Well, let's have a closer look at where the battle is being fought right now. Fighting, of course, continuing throughout the night and the morning in Ukraine. In addition to the capital, Kiev, there were several reports of fighting in the south of the country. Ukrainian officials said Kherson, Sumy, Mykolaiv and Odessa were under attack. Russian forces have claimed to have taken over Melitopol in the southeast of Ukraine. However, the UK's Defence Minister James Heappey told Sky News that was definitely not the case. Heavy fighting has been reported at Gostomel Airport to the capital's northwest. Its control has apparently been switching back and forth as gun battles continue. A missile hit a high-rise building on the southwestern outskirts of Kiev, near Zheliny Airport, and explosions were heard at the Boryspil International Airport. Well, fighting and gunshots have been reported in the government quarter of Kiev this morning, near many key buildings in the capital. The mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, has urged people to stay indoors, but he denies claims that there are Russian forces inside the capital.
Friends, dear Kievian, the night was hard, but there are no Russian troops in the capital. The enemy is trying to get into the city, in particular from the side of Gostomel, Zhytomyr. The aggressors were neutralized there. Now submersive groups are attacking in Kiev. There were several clashes, firefights. As of 6 a.m., 35 people were wounded, including 2 children. I ask everyone to keep calm and stay in shelters. The enemy will attack from the air.
Well, Ukraine is claiming increasing support in its campaign to get Russia banned from SWIFT. This is a global interbank messaging system that helps facilitate payments and it helps make the markets tick. Well, Ukraine believes that if Russia is banned from the system, it will cost them vast amounts of money. And Ukraine has claimed today that Cyprus and Italy have said they will not block a decision to ban Russia from SWIFT. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky tweeting this morning, "This is the beginning of a new page in the history of our state." Mario Draghi, he says in a phone conversation, supported Russia's disconnection from SWIFT. The provision of defence assistance, Ukraine must become part of the EU. And Ukraine's foreign minister says France, to his belief, was in support of the disconnection from SWIFT. Let's look at the situation in Dnipro in southeastern Ukraine, where the Ukrainian government has said Russian airstrikes have targeted military facilities. John Sparks is there for us.
We do know that there are airstrikes landing in locations across the country, quite close to here, a city called Poltava. It's been hit by the Russian equivalent of the cruise missile. Also in Sumy in the northeast, intense fighting there as well, we are hearing, and in Mariupol in the southeast. And the port city of Melitopol on the Sea of Azov in the south, the Interfax news agency quoting Russian military sources saying the Russians have taken that port city. But the Ukrainian mayor of that city has popped up to say, oh no, you haven't. We're still in control. The Ukrainians are still in control of Melitopol. So the situation there, unclear, but indicative, as we've been talking this morning about the strength and the resilience of the Ukrainian forces. It is clear, I think, that the Russians have not used the full might of their military machine, particularly their artillery. If you think about what they did to the city of Grozny in Chechnya in the mid-90s, they leveled it. And they've done the same in their partnership with the Syrian regime as well. They could do the same here in Kharkiv, a large city, 1.5 million people, very close to the border. They have not done that yet. And the people who live there have, for the most part, they have stayed put. They've been in and out of the shelters, particularly yesterday there was a long artillery barrage, but the people for the most part have stayed put. We drove out of the city yesterday. The roads were remarkably clear, and I was speaking to an English teacher an hour or so ago, and he said, you know what, I went home last night, I must have been really tired, but I slept pretty well. Nothing woke me up. So I think it tells you something about the spirit of the people here. They are united and they are remaining strong. And if you look at Kharkiv, that is a city with a large ethnic Russian population, very close to the border, many tens of thousands of Russians brought to live there during the Soviet period. But if President Putin thought that he would receive support for his invasion from ethnic Russian people in Ukraine, he is being, I mean, it's not happening. That proves to be, or it's proving to be, a mistake. There is a refugee situation developing, understandably. The UNHCR, the UN's refugee agency, saying about 50,000 people on the move at the moment, heading south to Moldova, west towards Poland and also Romania. The Polish president has said they will accept every single Ukrainian refugee who arrives, and we are hearing of large queues on the border, 10 hours or more. The Romanian defense minister, he has said they will accept 500,000 Ukrainian refugees if they need to. But at the moment, Ukrainian people, like the military themselves, are remaining united and strong, led ably, I think it's fair to say, by their President Zelensky.
John Sparks there. Look at these families trying to cross the Ukrainian border now. Families desperate to get out. This is the border with Poland to the west, where in fact most people are heading. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees telling us around 120,000 people have fled Ukraine since the Russian invasion started just on Thursday morning. People going to neighbouring countries, the majority of them giving waves, aren't they? They've families there with their children. Since the 24th of February, people have fled to many neighbouring countries, the vast majority Poland, but also Hungary, Moldova, Slovakia and Romania. Numbers, the UNHCR says, are rising. Here, the Armed Forces Minister James Heappey said he believed Russia's military hasn't made the progress it had hoped and will now meet new challenges.
They will need to start to consider how they will resupply the troops that have taken longer to get down to Kiev than they thought. They will need to resupply those who have been engaged in very fierce combat all around other Ukrainian cities. So there's a challenge for the Kremlin that I'm not sure that we think they necessarily thought they would have to work their way through. And that is potentially an opportunity for the Ukrainians to fight back even more.
Protests against the Ukrainian invasion are growing in Russia and its surrounding countries. Thousands of protesters took to the streets in the Georgian capital Tbilisi, calling for an end to the invasion. Huge crowds gathered outside the parliament buildings there. They called for the resignation of Georgia's Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili, who said his country would not join the West in sanctioning Russia. Anti-war demonstrations have also taken place in more than 50 cities across Russia. Police made a number of arrests in St. Petersburg, where those involved in a peaceful protest were grabbed by riot police and then arrested. In Moscow itself, people came from across the city to mark another night of bombing by laying flowers and lighting candles at the Ukrainian embassy. Here, more than 1,000 people rallied outside Downing Street, chanting, "Russia, go home." Many were from Ukraine and were visibly upset about events in their country.
Russia, go home!
Well, let's get the latest on the situation in Ukraine and the perspective from Lithuania, a country that, like Ukraine, was part of the Soviet Union before declaring independence. Ambassador Vygaudas Ušackas is a former Lithuanian foreign minister and EU ambassador to Russia. Hi, thank you for joining us today. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly there. How worried are you about the situation in Ukraine? And we know that Russian troops are moving towards Kiev, but really some fierce resistance still from the Ukrainians.
It is indeed, encouraging and remarkable to see that Ukrainians have united against an enemy, which is, the gangster Putin's regime, who represents Russian nation, which probably historically has the closest ties with Ukrainians. And that's a profound shock for, everyone, including in Lithuania. And we extend our wholehearted sympathies, support, solidarity. People are fundraising money. Government is sending some ammunition and military supplies. And paradoxically, what we see, wherever you are, in London, Vilnius, or Berlin, Ukrainians being neither members of NATO nor the European Union, fighting for our freedom.
Are you surprised that Russia's gone in so quickly and so deeply, or did you expect them just to be confined to the east?
Well, I think, as I said, and as other analysts on the program already noted, I think it is unexpected for Kremlin to see such a fierce resistance coming from Ukrainians, not only from the military, but from the nationwide. I think President Putin was counting on a broad collaboration of Russians and some Ukrainians. And I'm sure that he has somewhere in his shelf already prepared a puppet government who would appear as soon as Kiev falls down. But that's not the case. And, we have to, we pray and we hope that Ukrainians will withstand.
Many nations now sending artillery, aren't they, additional equipment to Ukraine. Should that help in any way? Admittedly, the Defence Secretary here has said that this equipment will get through despite the Russians fighting.
I think it is of paramount importance that the West supplies any support, military support we can with equipment and weaponry, and enable the Ukrainians challenge and stop this, horrific war to end. At the same time, as broad and comprehensive sanctions must be applied so that Russian regime starts feeling like another Northern Korea.
Do you think the SWIFT system here, this mechanism for facilitating payments, should be targeted?
It must have been already implemented 8 years ago.
So too late?
It's not too late. I hope it's not too late. I think first of all, as strong and comprehensive sanctions are imposed on entire sector of Russian economy and financial institutions, and keep them, for long, so that the people would start reconsidering whether Putin is right and where he leads the population of 140 million.
What do you think ordinary Russians will make of this? Vladimir Putin, by what you were saying there and what our analysts have been saying, he perhaps expected a very, very quick capture, certainly of Kiev and other key places. That hasn't happened. And here we are potentially in a protracted conflict now.
Well, I continue to speak with many Russians of different generations and different professions. And I must confess that too many of them are brainwashed through the very effective Russian propaganda in portraying and presenting this very harsh narrative that Ukrainians are, neo-Nazis, that what was happening in Ukraine in the last 8 years was all, colorful revolutions sponsored by CIA under the European Union flag. But people, I think people are starting to realize that it's a huge bluff, and it's, I hope people will start, bearing in mind so many links, family links, relative links between Ukraine and Russia. And as soon as they will receive, I don't wish, but that's going to be a necessity to withstand body bags. Hopefully, it will reconnect with a tragic, tragic war in Afghanistan and how did it end.
How are people in Lithuania looking at this, given what's going on?
Well, people, it's 180% in favor of Ukrainians for the membership in NATO and the EU. Population leadership feel that the West was too weak and too late to apply harsh, restrictive, negative measures. And the West was not generous. In 2008, was it in Bucharest, when NATO, Americans and Europeans promised that Ukraine and Georgia one day will become members of NATO. And there was no inch made towards a membership, which opened the gate for Putin to launch this horrific war. We have to
protect if he wanted to move outside Ukraine. It is supposed to be a defense organization. Is it capable of protecting other countries?
Well, under these circumstances, when Putin pretends to rewrite the history back to 1990s and literally to regain control of the former Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact, nothing is excluded. The only reassurance, the two reassurances. First,